It's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In the last blog, I shared a newspaper and also online article about the NDIS. And the article says, NDIS leaves black hole of abolished care services and NDIS abandons disabled to state hospitals. You can check out last week's episode by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to share the story of Dion, a young man with muscular dystrophy. He's been ventilated with a tracheostomy for 14 years and he has been fearing for his life for a long time now because he only gets care with support workers and not with intensive care nurses as is recommended by best practice guidelines. Dion and his wife Estella have been first inquiring about our intensive care at home service in April last year. Since then, we have supported him in his fight to get the care with intensive care nurses. Anybody with ventilation and tracheostomy needs to stay alive and live a good quality of life. Dion's plight was documented in the Sydney Morning Herald a couple of weeks ago, and I put a link to it below this video. And I also read it out here for you. The article says, Dion's fight to overcome muscular dystrophy so he can continue helping others. Dion is a self-confessed nerd, a Star Wars aficionado who for the past few years has been tackling a PhD in computational biology to find answers for people with diseases that defy genetic explanation. But right now, the 39-year-old's focus isn't on completing his doctorate, it's on staying alive. I just want to live my life, stay alive, and contribute to the community, said Mr. Detterer, whose head is rotated 80 degrees to the left and whose arms are permanently bent inwards. Dion suffers from muscular dystrophy and he needs 24-hour ventilation with tracheostomy to stay alive. He says his support network has become plagued by inadequacies. Mr. Detterer was born with Ullrich congenital muscular dystrophy, a genetic condition that has caused his muscles to weaken and waste. At the age of 25, he suffered a brain hemorrhage and was moved to full-time ventilation via a tracheostomy. He did not let his disability stop him from walking his own hero's journey, a la Star Wars, receiving a university medal, starting a PhD and marrying Estella, a full-time chef. In 2003, the New South Wales government granted him a care package that included 24-hour care by registered nurses. But 2 years later, the nurses were replaced with unqualified support workers, and Mr. Detterer said the standard of care deteriorated to the point he now believes his life is at risk. With the New South Wales health system already accounting for nearly a third of the state's budget, Dion's situation raises uncomfortable questions about how to balance the unquestionable needs of an individual with those of the wider community. Mr. Detterer said there were large gaps in his 24-hour roster and alleged some of the Southern Cross employed support workers had behaved inappropriately, allegedly drinking alcohol prior to a shift, smoking marijuana, and even asking his wife for a massage. Up to 90 hours are unfilled each fortnight, and my wife can't cover the gaps because she's the breadwinner keeping us afloat with the mortgage, he says. New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard says they're working to find some sensible balance to improve Dion Detterer's situation. Most of the support workers aren't suitably qualified and can't operate ICU level equipment. One couldn't identify the tracheostomy kit while I was suffocating and my wife had to race in her car just to get to me to save my life. Out of desperation, he wrote to Health Minister Brett Hazzard last year asking for registered nurses so he can continue to contribute to society in a meaningful way as a researcher and a developer in the field of genomics, and more importantly, as a husband and son. A couple of months later, a case conference with representatives from Enable New South Wales, which runs the home ventilation program Southern Cross, Muscular Dystrophy in New South Wales, and New South Wales Health, was held. While a plan of action was drawn up, nothing changed. I want my care to be clinically and legally appropriate. I want to know that I am going to be alive tomorrow if something goes wrong, he said. I believe they're cutting corners, and while I understand the budget is very tight, they're risking people's lives. Mr. Hazzard told Fairfax Media the cost of caring for Mr. Dedder was about $400,000 a year, and if registered nurses were provided, it would be a lot more expensive. He has checked with HealthShare New South Wales, which runs Enable New South Wales, and contacted Southern Cross and said the care provided to Dion Detterer was consistent with what was being delivered across Australia. It's a challenging balancing act. The service must be adequate and appropriate, but we also have to recognise the cost is very high to taxpayers, Mr. Hazzard said. Nevertheless, I've asked them to look at Dion's case and see if there's anything we can do to find some sensible balance that will help him move forward with his life. Southern Cross spokeswoman Barbara Merrin said it had no knowledge of a support worker drinking before a shift, but was made aware of someone smoking marijuana during one. She said this worker immediately underwent drug and alcohol testing and the results were clear. He was still removed from Mr. Detterer's program. This unsubstantiated accusation has caused great distress to the support worker and his family, she says. Mrs. Merrin said Southern Cross provided quality care, made evident by the fact Mr. Detterer had not been admitted to hospital for a long time. There would be no gaps in Dion's roster if he had accepted the 2 support workers we recruited, but we are continuing to take steps to improve the stability of Dion's roster through ongoing job advertising. Southern Cross continues to work with Dion, his family, the funder, and other parties to try and address Dion's concerns. PhD supervisor Professor Paul Kwan from the University of New England said he was impressed by Dion Detterer's intellect and ability to quickly pick things up. He said he hoped Mr. Detterer could finish his high-risk and high-yield project, which involves using computer simulations to study how genetic variations are maintained or introduced across generations. Mr. Detterer said he would be able to complete it in a year if he had the time and headspace to dedicate to it. I've been programming since I was 8 and my passion is in maths, science and research, he said. My whole life was heading towards this and it's all slipping through my fingers because I just can't manage a doctorate and the stress of being in survival mode with my care. So that's the article. And if you want to find out how we can help you to get your loved one out of intensive care, including palliative care or long-term acute care or nursing home, or if you find that you have insufficient support for your loved one at home on a ventilator, like in Dion's situation, and if you want to know how we get funding for our service or any other questions you have, please send me an email to patrick@intensivecareathome.com. That's PATRIK for Patrick @intensivecareathome.com, or call me on one of the numbers on the top of the website. Also have a look at our careers section. We are currently hiring ICU and pediatric ICU nurses for clients in Melbourne, Sunbury and in South Gippsland, Victoria. We are an NDIS, TAC and DVA approved community service provider in Australia. And we have also been part of the Royal Melbourne Health Accelerator program earlier last year for innovative healthcare companies in Melbourne. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. I'm looking forward to hear from you. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I'll see you again next week in another update.